She has the body of a villain in a novel. Originally, the red-haired woman's role was to covet the male protagonist and die in the end. However, she decides to live as a wealthy, unemployed woman until her brother hunts down the crazed giant, Silver. After some effort, she manages to tame him. Now she just needs to find the heroine, hand over the collar, and that's it. But suddenly, "Hi, I'm Mimi, and I'll be the voice that carries you through the stories you love, sweetie. Through the stories that stir your soul, letting every emotion unfold and settle deep within your heart." And with that, let's begin. The story begins with the villain of the story, the beautiful red-haired villain Rosetta Kazel. She is the youngest daughter of the Duke of Cascavel, a powerful family that was considered untouchable even by the imperial family. Growing up, Rosetta got everything she ever wanted, and when she couldn't, she made sure to destroy it so that no one could have it. Because of that, she became famous for being a twisted person. But there was one thing that the beautiful Rosetta wanted most in this world, and that was none other than the crown prince. If Rio goes and says, "But what exactly made this devilish lady want the prince?" Would it be because of his beautiful appearance, or perhaps her desire to rise to the top of the empire? Maybe it is because the crown prince is claimed as the next holder of the heart of the land, a hidden jewel above the palace. In fact, none of these were the real reasons that made the young lady want him, although it is true that she wanted the precious jewel. More than that was the curse of his Rio that transformed him into a wolf during the full moon. This revealed that the crown prince was not fully human, and that made Rosetta want him, a person who could transform into a wolf. She was fascinated by his rare silver fur and bright golden eyes. To get closer to him, she decided to become a crown princess, even though she did not really want the position. Unfortunately for her, if Rio already had a woman he loved, and because he was part wolf, he was only able to love one person in his life. Eventually, he ended up choosing her companion instead of Rosetta because there was simply no way he would like her. But this also made Rosetta change her approach. If Rio would refuse to come to her, she decided that she would force him to do it, and the only way to achieve this was to take away his position as prince. It didn't matter how she did it. She knocked Rio out of his position using means that no normal person would use. Obsessed with having him, even if he was broken, she really was a great villain. But it was also because of this that Rosetta met her death at the hands of Rio, whom she had so young left completely alone after being punished for her evil actions like most villains. This should have been the end of the villain Rosetta Kazel, but now the villain is sitting in front of her makeup mirror while one of her maids asks if there is a problem in her mind. Yes, there was a problem. The protagonist woke up in civilian, possessing the body of Rosetta Cascavel. She couldn't believe her eyes when she woke up, since she saw her reflection instantly transform into another person overnight. And on top of that, she was the villain of the book that she had just read. She sighs heavily, thanks to the fact that she knew that Rosetta would be beheaded in the end, which she deeply feared. But from what she was understanding, the real Rosetta died for some reason, and this led to her possessing the villain's body. Although she is having difficulty understanding why she was sucked into Rosetta's body, the only thing the protagonist is sure of is that she is already dead. She could still remember how it happened. She was crossing the street when the light flashed before a speeding truck appeared next to her. Remembering now, she could still feel the pain that crushed her entire body. That is why she was surprised when she opened her eyes and saw that she was no longer in the real world. Her body, which should have been all broken and injured, was untouched. It was only when she looked in the mirror that she understood that she would now live as Rosetta Kazel. A week had passed since the incident, and until now, she was still not used to living in this body. Although she admits that Rosetta's beauty is unique, if she frowns a little, her gaze soon becomes cold, giving a frightening impression. She was so busy admiring her own face that she forgot the maid beside her, who was asking if she should change the lady's hairstyle. Because of her confused look, this also brought her back to reality. She told the maid that she liked it and that she should continue braiding it. Although it took some time, the protagonist is getting used to living as Rosetta. Now that she has been given a second chance at life, she is determined to live it to the best of her ability. Remembering what happened in the book, she recalls how Rosetta had a perfect life except for what would happen in the future. Because her character was born in a diamond crib, she could simply live as a rich and unemployed person, something she did not have the chance to experience in her previous life. On the other hand, she does not know if it is a fair trade to live the life of a rich villain but is destined to die. The original story will only start in a month, so she believes that she still has a chance to change Rosetta's fate. In the novel, the story begins when the female protagonist, Liliana, temporarily triggers the curse of Zion, which turns her into a wolf. Due to this incident, the crown prince bonds with Liliana, and later the plot unfolds as the two attend the academy together. On the other hand, Rosetta attended the academy on her parents' orders, and she met the two. From then on, Rosetta's obsessive behavior towards Rio began, which later turned into intense anger. As her character will not have the opportunity to see the end, she intended to change so she could live in the story forever. This was definitely her goal, but fate had a different course. Before she could act on her plan, her brother did something shocking. She was taken to the prison cell where her brother introduced her to a large silver wolf with bright golden eyes. As far as she knew, there was only one silver wolf in the entire empire. The cursed prince was Rio. She did not understand how Rio had ended up there, causing her plan to fall apart. At this rate, there was a chance that she would die before the story even officially began. Overwhelmed by her brother handing her a silver wolf, Rosetta sat down on the couch, feeling desperate. She looked at the key to the wolf's cage that her brother Renan had given her, wondering how things ended up like this. At that moment, her brother's face appeared in her mind, saying that only the fierce and bold could take a beast like that, and so he gave it to her. She sank even deeper into the couch just thinking about it, but then said out loud that she thought if she did it right, she could have some facilities. There is a striking difference between what happened now and what happened in the story, because in the original story, it was Rosetta herself who got involved. Rio does not return to Renoa. In the novel, Rosetta had a hobby of hunting, so they saw a rare silver wolf. If she were the original Rosetta, she would have already captured and imprisoned Rio. By this time, she had met the crown prince before the female protagonist, Liliana. Although no one knew that Rio was a wolf, there was a curse. It was this curse that prevented him from returning to human form. All because he was caught in the queen's trick to poison him, causing her curse to spread. Remembering all this, the protagonist realizes that the original Rosetta never saw him return to human form, but she was able to recognize him because of his striking eyes compared to the other characters. Rosetta had brighter eyes. Sharp then, when she looked into the eyes of the cursed prince, she knew for sure that he was a wolf, which brought her joy but only for a short time since, soon after this discovery, she heard along with Liliana, which led to feelings of anger and jealousy that turned into madness in the end. Returning to the present, she focuses on her current situation, looking at the key to the civilian cage given to her by her brother. She threw it on the floor and got up, getting tired of the constant noise that the creature was making from the cage, so she approached determined to shut it up since her eardrums were about to burst. She covers her ears as she approaches and thinks how she feels more pity than fear. At the moment, Rio was panting, staring as she approached. She pulled out a chair and sat right in front of him. She asks him directly if he doesn't like her, and he responds by growling while showing his teeth. Rosetta says that she doesn't like him either. Now she wonders how the hell she will be able to communicate with him. Playing with a lock of her hair, she remembers that he kept his rationality. After meeting Liliana in the story, she had no idea how he behaved before he turned into a wolf. So she tried to communicate with him again, asking if she could free him, but he responded with aggressive barks. Seeing that the situation was a little hopeless, she tried to bargain, saying that she would free him as long as he promised not to attack her. She asked him to nod if he understood, but at that point, Rio became even more agitated, hitting the bars and exposing his fangs for her to see. Eventually, Rosetta gave up and assured him that she wouldn't do anything, so he should calm down. She thought that this way, she could really die if the situation continued like this. On the other hand, she looked like a dying protagonist for a moment. Instead of calming down, she remained on alert with her fangs exposed, even with her incessant warnings to him. While Rosetta still couldn't understand whether or not this creature could understand her, she knew one thing for sure. She could not release him for her own safety, at least until he became human. This leads to problem number 2. Only the female protagonist can cure the civilian's curse, and she wouldn't show up for another month, so it looks like she'll be stuck. She managed for now. Saying this out loud, Rosetta wondered if the creature could understand her. Since he laughed, it seemed arrogant so far anyway. She thought about how by now she would have removed the curse from him if she were the female protagonist, regretting that she wouldn't be in such a worrying situation if she had this ability from the beginning. After all, Liliana, the female protagonist, is an excellent witch who demonstrated an exceptional talent in purification. Remembering what happened in the book, she notices that this river escaped after being held captive for a month, fleeing to the northern regions in his wolf form. It was then that he met Liliana, the protagonist, who quickly realized the curse of his Rio and purified him, turning him back into a human, which led them to get involved soon after this episode. Thinking about all this, the protagonist wondered if another situation had happened, one in which Liliana didn't have the ability to purify him and still approached the civilian. In that case, a different event would have occurred, one that would end in blood. Leaving all this aside, Rosetta has already accepted that they will have to stay together for a month since they have already met. Anyway, with that, she committed that she would be protecting him at least until the female protagonist shows up. To feel better, she will just think of it as if she were raising a dog. Shifting her attention to Rio, Rosetta noticed that his injuries were quite serious, especially the ones inflicted by the assassins sent by the queen, and this made her think that he was quite powerful, launching himself at her despite so many injuries. At the same time, she thought that she also had to take care of him. As for this second part, although Rosetta is not sure if this will bring him closer, she decides to try, so she gets up and asks him to wait a bit. But as soon as she took a step, Rio started barking again, making her irritated with the unnecessary noise that was filling the mansion. So another day passes, and now Rosetta is carrying a plate full of meat to where Rio is being kept. The wolf heard it long before he could see her, and surprisingly, he did not bark at all. She then left the plate in front of him and encouraged him to eat. She took a step back and stood at a safe distance, commenting that it would be nice if he always behaved like this. But at that moment, he suddenly growled at her, causing her to take the food away from him as a form of provocation, which made him even more irritated. But she didn't persist for long and soon returned the plate, leaning against the wall to watch him eat. Rosetta thought to herself, like before, he didn't even look at the meat because he was wary of it at that moment. But now the opposite happened, and he completely ignored it. Since there is not much to do, Rosetta spends most, if not all, of her time with him because she still needs to get closer to him. Compared to the first time, she could tell that now they were familiar with each other. In his case, she thinks he was more like just a food provider, but at least it's something. She really hoped that by giving him food, Rio would open his heart to her, which would change his view of her from a noisy, annoying piece of meat to a kind food provider. But that doesn't really matter since now, if Rio treats Rosetta like a piece of meat, another notable change in Rio is how his incessant barking has subsided. He had been barking nonstop for the past 2 days, but that all changed when Rosetta started feeding him. Although she thinks it was because he had started to strain his throat with the barking, she also thinks he is slowly giving in to his pride. Some of the servants also tried to get closer and try to calm him down, but none of that worked, and they only got scared. So she believes they won't be going there for a while. Rosetta continues to watch Rio as he eats, thinking that this is the quietest time of the day in the entire mansion. She also noticed that he was quite resilient, seeing how he healed from his injuries. Before taking his plate away, since he had finished eating, she turned to leave and told him that she would be back again tomorrow. However, Rio just stared at her as she walked away before closing his eyes to sleep. As she went up to the dining room, Rosetta was surprised to see Renault sitting at the table. She didn't expect her second brother to return so soon. She sat across from her brother. Rosetta asked Renault what he was doing there, especially since he rarely spent time there. At home, it hadn't been long since he had left Rio in his care, which was a rare thing for him. Renan also wondered when the last time he had spent time there was, since, as the second son of the Duke couple, he lived his life with little interference. Since he was far from being the successor of the family, he had a free nature, spending his time wandering around where he preferred. Back to the present, he asks Rosetta if she had given the wolf a name, making her realize that she had been calling the creature Wolf or hey, for the past few days, and the idea of giving it a name hadn't even crossed her mind until now. Renan suggested that she do it, and Rosetta asked for suggestions for the wolf's name, but he gave the task back to her, since it was hers, not his. Because of Rosetta's fight, she asks her brother if he likes to see her. Yes, which he admits that he does, never imagining that he would live to see the day when the great Rosetta Kazel would be so involved with a wolf. At this point, she points out that he was the one who brought the wolf, and this time being a question if she wants to give it back to him. The answer surprised her since she knows that Renew is as bad-tempered as the original Rosetta. If he took Rio back, he would certainly mistreat him just like Rosetta did with a wolf in the original story. The cursed prince would never forgive Renew for what he did, so somehow he would get him expelled from the family. Then he would take his own life in silence. Shortly after, his family would survive, but Renew would have a horrible ending. Imagine that. Rosetta tells her brother that she would keep the wolf and raise him. She also warned him not to touch him, or else he would lose his hand. Satisfied with her decision, Renew began to sing while eating, but before he could take the next bite, Rosetta got angry, grabbing his face with force, a large piece of meat in his mouth, making him choke. After that, she refused her chair, satisfied with her little revenge for the inconvenience he had caused her in the last few days. While Renan continued to yell at her, he asked if she wanted to kill him. Later that night, Rosetta went down to the saddle where Rio was staying. Realizing that she had forgotten to give him a name after the meal with her brother, as soon as she met him, he began to get cautious, narrowing his eyes as she approached. Rosetta grabbed a chair and placed it right in front of him, telling him that she would now give him a name and react to the ones he liked. The first one she suggested was albino or white, but the wolf just turned his head and growled. She tried to lie, but ended up getting the same answer. So she continued living with this river, which later turned into Cheryl and finally evolved into Sarah. At that moment, the wolf turned his head as Rosetta approached, asking if he liked it. Seeing that he was not reacting violently, she decided that would be his name from now on, which caused a small growl from the wolf. She began to think that now that she had given him a name, they were closer and that maybe she wouldn't hate him so much. Another day passed, but this time, instead of a cold, dark cell, Sarah, as Rio is now called, entered a well-lit room covered in a luxurious Cherokee Sarah rug. As she examined the unknown place, Rosetta has one of her maids named Marina silently watching the wolf, who finally settled down on an expensive pillow. Upon seeing him snuggle up, Rosetta smiled radiantly, but this only made her maid frown even more, thinking that this was too much pampering for a wolf. Before all this happened, Rosetta had called Marina to the cell earlier, giving instructions to clean the room next to hers since she intended to give said room to her new pet. At first, Marina couldn't believe her eyes, warning Rosetta that this could be dangerous since there was a chance Sarah could escape. With this, Rosetta replied that they should do their best to make the room more resistant so not even he would be able to escape. With her most devilish smile, she asked Marina if she would be willing to do this. At this point, the maid had no choice but to do as she was instructed, which ended up resulting in the current situation. Marina continues to observe her mistress' reaction, and from what she was seeing, the mistress seemed satisfied with her work so far, so she took this moment to approach Rosetta and ask what they should do with the muzzle. Upon seeing the muzzle, Rosetta remembered that they used to put it on him when he ate, which was quite an annoying task. But since the wolf never tried to escape, she thought it would be okay for him to just ignore it for now while also feeling guilty for having tranquilized him earlier. She tells Marina that they should wash him and put the muzzle away for now, since she intended to use it when they went out for walks. Hearing that Rosetta still intended to walk the creature, Marina and the rest of the maids left but just hid from her with a smile, saying that she couldn't keep Sarah locked up forever. On the other hand, Marina's shoulders slumped in frustration, but her mistress didn't mind, adding another instruction for them to make a collar and a name tag as well as to also put her address on the back of it. Marina couldn't believe what her mistress was asking her, but Rosetta vaguely told her that a lot of people seemed to want to steal her things. At this point, Marina's attitude changed, becoming more somber as she asked Rosetta if she wanted her to eliminate these people. However, the mistress said no, smiling timidly after the suggestion of her maid. Rosetta insisted on Rio because, despite her maid being from a family of elite assassins, not even she could kill the person that Rosetta was referring to. After all, she was referring to none other than the queen herself, thinking to herself that her maid would have her throat cut before even taking a step towards the empress. Now, regarding the current problem, Rosetta thinks it would be problematic if rumors of a silver wolf started circulating. She could not risk the rumors spreading, even though that would probably take a while to happen. Besides, the story was already very different from the original, where the queen got angry and ordered Sarah to be tracked. In the remote possibility of the Empress finding out that Sarah is with her, she will probably send assassins or use her power to capture him. Rosetta believes she can face any of the Empress's assassins if that happens, but she still wanted it not to come to that if it were possible. Even if she is forced to protect him at the moment, she swears never to hand him over to the determined Empress. She intends to take care of him until handing him over to the female protagonist. After all, Rosetta would not have the courage to simply abandon him and make him suffer in the hands of the queen, even though he was cursed. Still adjusting to the new place, Sarah calmly looked sideways at the maid who approaches with her bowl of water when suddenly he advances towards her, making the maid knock over her bowl, spilling the water on the floor. Rosetta, who was watching the whole time, asked what had happened this time, telling him that he needed to get rid of that bad behavior. But the wolf just turned his face to the side and looked at him from the corner while Rosetta continued to scold him, saying that she had brought him there, but he looked much worse now. She leans closer, pointing her finger while telling the wolf that she is now his master, so he better learn to behave. But the wolf just growled back with a look of contempt, and soon after, he started barking again, making everyone cover their ears. Marina approached her mistress, but before she could do what she wanted, Rosetta sighed and began to yell at Sarah, who continued. She barked even louder, leaving the poor maid stressed with the noise of the two. They continued until Renan suddenly appeared, asking his sister to do something about the beast's behavior. Rosetta turned around and told him to leave, explaining that she was in the middle of training Sarah. With that, Renan asked exactly what she was training the wolf for, since he was still as noisy as ever, which was enough for Rosetta. She replied that he was the one who abandoned the animal with her, so he had no right to get stressed. Seeing her brother's agitation, Rosetta asked the room to bark even more, enough to make her brother go deaf. Meanwhile, Renan and the maids just covered their ears while the barking echoed throughout the mansion. Now Renan expresses frustration and regret for having given the wolf to her, while Rosetta continues to laugh at him, finding happiness in her brother's despair. So Sarah began to occupy the room next to Rosetta's, although she spends most of her time in Sarah's room. Now the wolf was sleeping while hugging her expensive pillow. Rosetta is sitting on the couch, looking at him, wondering if the method of taming animals that she had learned would be effective on him. It turns out that she has been reading some tutorial books on training canines, like How to Adopt a Puppy, My Grumpy Dog, What Should I Do? And So Wonderful, created by a wonderful master in the books. The dog master transforms a gentle little lamb, inscribed by a famous best-selling author. So she puts her faith in the author, hoping he could fix Sarah's temperament. But even after reading all this, Rosetta seems to have reached a dead end when she tried to teach him to give paw. Instead, Sarah tried to bite her. When she tried to teach him to sit, he simply got angry and started barking at her, starting a fight between pet and owner. But she soon had no choice but to bribe him with food to keep him quiet. In the end, she tried everything from getting angry to pacifying him and even begging. But the wolf didn't even recognize her and continued acting proud and fierce just like before. Another week went by and there was no improvement. She tried to tell him that if he continued with this attitude, they wouldn't be able to go for walks, but Sarah, acting proud, simply ignored this, refusing to listen, which left Rosetta frustrated and torn between getting rid of him in a month. It didn't help either, but now that she thought about it, she really didn't need to wait a whole month before she could hand him over to the female protagonist. With that, she got up and decided at that moment to go for a walk. Just when she bumped into one of the maids carrying a plate full of raw meat, she asked the lady where she was going, especially since it was time for Sarah's meal. Rosetta just told the maid that she would be responsible for feeding him today since she was going for a walk. This left the maid distressed while Rosetta took one last look at Sarah, thinking about how he had always been a bad boy, but she still fed him because he was handsome. With that, she told the maid to be careful not to get bitten and then left the mansion as soon as she was outside. She wondered about the places where she could find Liliana and if the female protagonist was in the North region. She also thought about whether she should just send someone to look for her, despite her doubts about whether the female protagonist could be found so easily since he had been vacant for a long time. She stayed in the same place for a long time. Besides, she was good at hiding and escaping, so in short, she knew that finding Liliana would be a difficult task. But suddenly, she heard a scream coming from the mansion asking for help. Rosta turned around, worried about what could have happened. As she started to run, she thought if this had something to do with that wolf, and just to confirm, it was suspicious. The door exploded, throwing some servants to the side. She could not believe what she saw. Sarah had freed himself from his chains and was staring at her from the top of the stairs. At that moment, she realized that those yellow eyes staring at her were proof that they had not gotten any closer despite their attempts. Sarah was no different, and now he was looking at Rosta as if she were just a piece of meat. Time seemed to have slowed down since she could see the servants and guards trying hard to get him away, with Marina and Renault running toward her while she stood paralyzed, thinking that she needed to get out of there immediately. She heard her brother and Marina calling for her just as Sarah lunged in her direction. As she braced herself for impact, Rosetta punched Sarah in the face before he could reach her. The wolf immediately retaliated and fell unconscious to the ground. Even she couldn't believe she had done something like that, while Renault and Marina remained perplexed by what they had just seen. There was one important thing the protagonist had forgotten about her current body. It was a well-known fact that Rosetta had a talent for fighting, something that had been established a long time ago. Whether with a sword, bow, or even her bare hands, she had a natural talent for combat that even surpassed Ronald, the successor of the family. Despite her unpleasant personality, there was a lot of expectation on her from the family, even though her older brothers found her problematic and annoying. In the past, Rosetta had focused on finding things that interested her instead of being crowned a genius or the strongest. Whenever problems arose, senators would lower their heads in frustration, asking the young lady where her strength had come from, but her parents remained by her side. However, when the emperor intervened, they had no choice but to leave Rosetta alone, thanks to his orders. So the young lady was left alone in the northern region like an uncontrolled animal. What was even more worrying for the protagonist was the fact that the author of the story did not describe Rosetta's story in his work. She only found out about it after possessing Rosetta's body. Now, back to the current situation, it seemed that Rosetta's strength was no joke, the protagonist finding it hard to believe how physically strong she was. Shortly after, Sarah regained consciousness, recovering from the blow and advancing toward her again, but this time Rosetta was ready. As soon as he launched himself toward her, she jumped on his back, continuing to shout for him to be quiet and ordering Marina to bring the muzzle. The maid obeyed and put it on just in time, but he managed to throw her off his back immediately, trying to get at her. Rosetta managed to avoid it in time, rolling to the side. When he turned around, she delivered a strong kick, making him faint again. As she looked at him, she realized that he would no longer be able to get up after receiving a blow like that. Before he could recover, Rosetta chose to carry him on her shoulder, leaving all the servants amazed. With her strength, knowing how powerful she was only made her angry when she remembered how she had begged him back then. Renault was the only one who was not impressed by everything that had happened, congratulating her on a job well done while welcoming her back to the house. More importantly, he told her that he needed to prepare a new cage for him. Rosetta ended up angry because that was the only thing he could say after seeing her fight against this wolf. But before she could make a sarcastic comment, she remembered that the beast was hers and that she should take care of it carefully. Rosetta knew she had more important things to do. She instructed one of the maids to take the wolf to Sarah's room. While looking at the damage that her pet had caused to the mansion, Sarah was quickly put back in his cage, where she regained consciousness when she saw him in the cage again. Rosetta found it strange that the cage was not damaged nor the lock broken, making her wonder how he managed to escape. She questioned the wolf, who only kept his head down with his muzzle still attached. Seeing this reaction, she was pleased. He was no longer just a piece of meat, but rather someone. She even asked him if he could tell her what happened, emphasizing that she was his master. Sarah responded with a small bark. Shortly after, an investigation was carried out to determine the culprit for what had happened. Based on their findings, the servant responsible for feeding Sarah that day was identified as the one responsible for his escape. When she approached his cage, she noticed an expensive item among the civilian toys, and out of greed, the servant chose to open the cage, resulting in the wolf's escape. Of course, these events did not go unpunished, and Renault suggested having the servant punished. In fact, he would have done more if it weren't for Rosetta, who silently fired the maid, knowing her brother's personality. She knew he would do much worse things and also wouldn't be surprised if the maid ended up dying in the next few days. Now, with renewed fervor, Rosetta went back to training Sarah, and even though a week had passed, he still showed some stubbornness. But fortunately for her, all she had to do was issue a mildly threatening shout to remind the wolf of the situation, and now he bent easily to her commands. With Sarah finally giving in, when she signaled in response, Rosetta gave him a plate of his favorite meat as a reward. The training was progressing very well, but a new problem presented itself. Sarah had been gaining a bit of weight recently, especially evident from the size of his belly after eating. She suggested they go for a walk to include some playtime along with the weight loss task. She looked at him in awe as she told him this, patting his belly to emphasize the fact that he had gained weight. But the wolf quickly reacted aggressively, fully aware of his weight gain, with a look of pity. She mentally apologized to him, determined to make him well so that he could meet the main heroine at his best. In a few weeks, the walking schedule soon became a daily habit, and before long, it was the wolf who remembered the activity. He became quite excited as he led Rosetta to fetch his collar, but as soon as she picked up his muzzle, Sarah became stubborn again, refusing to wear it. Rosetta insisted that he needed to wear it if he wanted to accompany her outside. Sarah explored the vast vegetation of the garden, sniffing a flower while wearing the muzzle. When he lifted one of his hind legs to pee on the flower, she remembered that he was still a wolf and that they really did that kind of thing. But what bothered her was the way he looked at her, a little embarrassed while he was about to do the act. Rosetta then recalled the content of a book she had read. It said that when dogs are about to do something embarrassing, they turn to their masters asking for protection. Because of this, Rosetta's eyes shone when she assured Sarah that she would protect him, but this only seemed to make the wolf even more embarrassed. She couldn't help but smile fondly when she saw him act like that. She asked him if he should stop looking at him. Suddenly, he started running toward something, and Rosetta almost let the leash slip. Sarah ran so violently that Rosetta could only ask him to stop. Suddenly, he stopped right in front of a tree and started barking at the branches. Looking up, she saw that he was barking at a crow. She held Sarah and tried to calm him down, but the wolf refused to do this, looking furiously at the animal above. Rosetta sighed in frustration as she tried to understand what was happening. She grabbed a nearby branch and tried to wave it at the animal, but it just stared without moving. Now irritated, she began to hit the branch harder. At that moment, the crow moved away while Sarah continued to growl at the figure. She had to calm him down again. Later that day, Rosetta narrated to Marina how the wolf had barked madly at a crow while the servant was brushing her hair. Upon hearing this, Marina told her that it must be something natural since wolves like to hunt. This left Rosetta confused, so she decided to check on him as soon as the maid finished fixing her hair. She arrived in time because one of the maids led her to take a look at the state of his room, where everything was turned upside down. Rosetta approached his cage, surprised to see that the bars had become crooked and the room was messy. She looked at him with a sad expression, not understanding why a crow had caused so much trouble. She was sure that there was something wrong with him, something she hadn't noticed, but she needed to calm him down anyway. She approached him, opening her arms while praising him with friendly words. Sarah seemed to accept the invitation, but then he suddenly ran in the opposite direction. Rosetta was irritated by his tricks, shouting for him to come to her, but he didn't obey. She was surprised to see him settle down on her bed. Once again, she couldn't help but find his behavior cute, while Marina was already starting to boil with anger at that crazy dog. She quickly instructed Marina to bring a new mattress. As soon as she got it, Rosetta approached Sarah, asking him to get off her bed. She even promised to let him sleep in her room if he behaved well. Marina discouraged this idea, fearing that it would be too dangerous since he had already tried to hurt her a while ago. The young woman said that it was okay this time, but the maid asked what would happen if he attacked her while she was sleeping. Before Rosetta could answer, Marina suggested that she at least put a muzzle on him. Fortunately, the young woman agreed, saying that she would put one on him before going to sleep, but there was also no need to do that now since he was calm. So she said that she would stay by his side and protect him, which Rosetta accepted without effort. The relationship between Rosetta and Sarah continued to improve to the point that the wolf stayed by her side wherever she went. During a meal with Renault, he asked if she took the wolf with her everywhere, to which she replied that she only let him get away from her at night. He seemed amused by the answer, saying with a smile that the wolf was finally under his feet, reflecting the change in his sister's behavior. Renault asked out loud where the old Rosetta had gone, the one who used to beat animals to make them stronger. She replied that she had changed her approach since she now realized all the mistakes she had made in the past, so she would start to live more calmly from then on. Renault was shocked by her words, finding it hard to believe that those were coming out of her mouth. Rosetta was offended by what he said, so she quickly commanded Sarah to bite him, which the wolf promptly obeyed. Renault complained, but before he could sink his teeth into the man, they heard a knock on the door and all three turned to see who it was. They were greeted by a tall man with short black hair wearing glasses. The Baron of Italy, one of the administrators of Renault's estate, was the first to greet the Baron, who had become a major headache for Rosetta. Meanwhile, the man directed his attention to the wolf growling in front of him, commenting that he had never seen a wolf of that type before.